Ah, there you are.
Hey, how are you?
Hi. Good, thanks. It's lovely to meet you at last.
Likewise.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I'm really thrilled about it. So I know you've done a lot of work about attachment between people and their dogs, and you've looked at behaviour problems that people experience, the effect on children of owning a dog in the family, where people source their dogs from with pet shops and things like that, shelters, and breed differences, of course, with your C-BARQ. So I guess I'd like you to just talk maybe what you'd want people to know if they were thinking about getting a dog that you think might make the biggest difference to their experience of dog ownership, in a way that they might have their most strongest attachment and the greatest fulfillment out of it, so that we don't end up with dogs in the pound and people unhappy with their relationship with their dogs, and basically foster much better relationships between dogs and people from your vast experience and all the work you've done.
Well, obviously it's like a big topic. It's a lot of
There
are a lot of issues, and not enough studies, so not enough research. So still a lot of question marks over many issues. But we do know, I guess, probably the best place to start would be the person themselves. And
it's 10 o'clock.
Oh, excuse me, that's my machine. It tells me what time. The people need to be aware that getting a dog is a serious undertaking. It's not a trivial decision, and unfortunately, quite a lot of people, it's a bit of a spur of the moment thing. They think, oh, look at that cute puppy in the pet store or whatever. Wouldn't it be nice to get a puppy? And they haven't really thought it through. They haven't thought about the implications. They maybe remember that, they used to have a dog when they were a kid or something, but they weren't looking after it then. It was the parents looking after it. And so people tend to go into the whole relationship in a somewhat light-hearted way. And I don't mean to put people off owning dogs. I think it's great owning dogs, but it's a serious commitment, and you shouldn't do it unless you know you've got the time and the resources and the ability to give that dog a reasonable quality of life and a good home and all these things. Next step is, where do you get your dog from? And our research findings suggest that that's a very critical decision, and that if possible, if you're seeking a puppy, if you want to get a puppy, and in some ways that's a good thing, you should get it from a reputable breeder. And of course, then the question is, well, what's a reputable breeder?
That's what I was going to ask you, yeah.
And that's a tricky question to answer. Generally speaking, a reputable breeder will be someone who is a breed aficionado, so they're really enthusiastic about their breed. They want to breed animals that are of top quality health-wise and behaviorally. They generally don't produce very many, so they produce a small number of litters per year, and they will be the kind of breeder who will be concerned about you and your ability to look after their puppy, because they care about what happens to their puppies. The opposite would be the commercial breeder, who basically views the production of puppies like the production of livestock animals. He's there to make a buck. He's there to make money out of it, and that involves a lot of things. It involves breeding as many litters as he can in as short a possible time, which is not good for the breeding females, the breeding bitches. It means that very often he's got a centralized facility with small breeding cages where he's mass producing puppies, and then he will sell those puppies on to people who are sometimes called bunchers, who will collect those puppies together and then distribute them out to the retail stores, the pet stores, wherever they're going to be sold.
James, can I ask you a question at that point?
Yeah.
As far as the motivation of the breeder and their incentive for breeding in the first place, and how they do it and how much they care, what difference does their attitude really make to the quality of the puppy as a pet? what do they do differently, people who care and don't breed so many compared to people who just have them in cages? And
Well, there are several things that might make a difference. So they're not that concerned about the health quality of their animals. So all they're interested in doing is just producing as many Pomeranian puppies as they can, or as many Maltese Terrier puppies as they can, in the shortest possible time. They don't really care about the quality of those animals, whether they're very healthy or producing healthy puppies. They're also wanting to wean them early. Now, in many countries there are laws, including the United States, where, strictly speaking, you can't sell a puppy that's less than 7 weeks of age. But it's very difficult for most retailers to tell how old a puppy is. So they're being sold puppies that are actually much too young. They're being weaned too early, and that has psychological effects on the puppy, being weaned early. It's a very, very important, stressful experience that can scar those puppies for life. Those puppies that come from commercial breeders are moved around a lot as well. So they're moved from place to place. They're put together with puppies from other litters, so they're exposed to all kinds of disease risks as well through this mixing of puppies from different litters and different producers. And so that increases the risk of the puppy acquiring some kind of infectious disease. And also, these puppies are thoroughly traumatized. They're being moved from place to place. They don't know where they're going to be from one day to the next. They may be left on their own for long periods. They may be stuffed in crates with lots of other puppies for long periods. And then finally they get into the pet store, and their sort of role there is to look cute and appeal to somebody's sympathy so that someone will buy them.
Sort of given a bath and a bit of powder.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're not socialised and handled very much either, obviously.
They are not.
Not given love and not exposed to domestic situations. And
we also, the other issue is we know that the breeding animals are very stressed in this environment, extremely stressed. And we know now that this stress, especially for a pregnant female, can actually be, the effects of that can be transmitted to the offspring, the pups, by turning, literally it sort of can turn off the expression of certain genes in the puppy. So
really?
Yeah, so those puppies will then grow up to be expecting a highly stressful environment. So they'll be adapted to deal with a highly stressful environment. And that's not the kind of puppy you want in your house, because it's going to be hyper-reactive and very difficult to manage, and it's going to develop a whole host of behavioral problems later down the line. So there are many, many reasons why you should not get a puppy that's younger than 7 or 8 weeks. You should not get a puppy from a retail outlet, if possible, because you know nothing about the history of that puppy. And it may have been bred in Vietnam or South Korea or anywhere and imported. I mean, this is now happening in the United States, where people are importing these puppies from Asia, where they are literally mass-produced in factories. And
this is my schnauzer, Bristles.
Oh,
you want to say Bristles?
He's enjoying being handled there. How old?
Yeah. She's 3.5 months.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
She's going to be quite a big girl then.
Oh, not really. No.
No?
She's a mini.
Oh,
yeah, she's not that big. Not that big. Oh yeah.
So, that's all part of it, and we know from a lot of studies we've done with things like guide dogs, that also the household environment, aspects of the household environment, can make a difference to the behavioral development of dogs.
Is this from the breeder, or when they get home to the new owner? Or both? This
is between the time when they leave the breeding facility at about 7 or 8 weeks, and they get reared by puppy raisers, in the case of guide dogs, until they're about a year to 14 months old, when they go back for training. And with those puppies, we find all kinds of aspects of the home environment make a huge difference to how well they do as guide dogs. So, for example, first-time puppy raisers tend to have more problems with the puppies than people who have more experience. In fact, the more experience you have, the fewer problems you have. So, obviously, I'm not suggesting that people who've never had a dog should never get a dog, but people who've never had a dog before probably need to do more homework and need to maybe take their puppies. They should feel more pressure to take their puppies to like puppy classes and make sure they socialize their puppies correctly. A lack of socialization is, one of the huge problems with puppies. People take them home, but then just keep them at home, so the puppy never meets anybody except the people who live in the household. And
part of the problem there is the immunisation protocol, isn't it?
Yeah.
People think they have to keep them locked away
and that's
away from the world.
That's something of a misunderstanding there. I mean, you should find out from your veterinarian, what are the local risks where you live from things like parvovirus and distemper. I mean, in my neighborhood, you almost never see those diseases. They've been virtually eradicated in my neighborhood. Vets don't see them. In other neighborhoods, it might be different. But your vet will know what's around in terms of infectious disease. And, even if you're concerned about your puppy coming in contact with other dogs who might be infected, you can still take your puppy out and carry him like you're carrying your puppy there. You can go outside and walk around the neighborhood holding your puppy, so it doesn't actually come in contact with other dogs. But it's exposed, it's seeing the world, and getting familiar with things that are going on out there. And if you don't take it out, then, you're going to risk having an animal that's a bit overwhelmed by all the stuff out there because they're not used to seeing it from an early age. And some of them will develop fears and phobias, which can be very difficult. Some of them will show what I would call defensive aggression. So they will, and I see this a lot in small dogs, that they, I think they feel very vulnerable because they are little. And if they're incorrectly socialized, or if they have some bad experiences when they're little, they tend to react to them by becoming very aggressive in defense. So they use sort of aggression as a way to protect themselves. And that's, I think, very often why you see these very small dogs that can be quite savage, actually, little chihuahuas and things that will snap at anything that comes near them, because I think deep down they're actually very frightened. And you can understand why they would be, because they are, they live in this world of giants.
And it's really hard to go back. You can't really go back and fix a bad puppyhood. It's not so easy, is it? It's better to get it right first time.
That's correct. That's absolutely.
Yeah. Cool.
What else?
What about breed differences?
Well, I mean, breed differences in behavior exist, but what I always like to say is that the differences within breeds, individual differences within breeds tend to be greater than the differences between breeds, the average difference between breeds. Sure. And so, yes, some breeds will present you with a higher risk of certain types of behavioral problems, but even within the worst breeds, you'll find a lot of individuals who are perfectly fine and aren't a problem. So it's it's a probability thing. You can't say, oh, don't get this breed because they're all horrible, because they aren't all horrible. Most of them will be fine. They'll just...
Pit bulls are lovely dogs, aren't they? And yet they've got a terrible reputation.
Yeah, right. And I mean, one of the worst breeds in our data set is an animal called the American Eskimo dog. It's got nothing to do with America or Eskimos, actually. It was originally called the German Spitz, and it was developed in Germany from Spitz breeds. And in the Second World War, the word German became a kind of dirty word, and so the breeders changed its name to American Eskimo dog. But it's if you look at aggression, this breed is off the charts. But actually, if you look at the distribution of scores of the individuals within the breed, you find that it's only about 10 to 15% of the dogs are in the sort of the area that I would call really bad. The rest of them are pretty much normal. So.
And then that's complicated by the kind of people who are attracted to certain breeds, and that kind of muddies the waters a bit too, doesn't it?
It does indeed. And that's very poorly understood. I mean, there are some studies that have suggested that it's the people who own pit bulls who are the problem rather than the pit bulls themselves. But that evidence is a little tricky to interpret, so I'm not sure.
But then it would be true, wouldn't it be true to say, James, that energy level of dogs is fairly predictable with breed, and that people who can't offer a dog a lot of exercise or work probably shouldn't go for a working breed and things like that?
Absolutely, yeah. And very basic stuff like that. If you've got a breed like a Vizsla or something, a hunting dog that has a tremendous amount of energy and constantly wants to be out there sort of hunting and foraging, then yeah, you need to be an active person. Keeping a Vizsla in an apartment building and not taking it for, walks in the countryside is probably a big mistake. Similarly, I don't generally advise people to get border collies as pets because the breed has been bred to work, and they like to work. They find work rewarding, and if you don't give them work to do, they'll invent strange things to do themselves. They become very sort of obsessive compulsive, and they'll do the weirdest things just because they do feel compelled to be like that, to be busy all the time. And if you don't have time to deal with an animal like that, to provide it with the outlets it needs to kind of express its inner drives, then you're going to have problems for sure. And then, of course, there's the whole other aspect of breed differences, which are the health problems. That's a huge topic, and a very difficult one. Pretty much every time I talk to the owner of a purebred dog these days, the first thing they tell me about is all the health problems they've been having with it.
Really?
Yeah, and it's getting completely out of control. Because the breeders, unfortunately, are breeding for the look of the animal, and they're not breeding for the health and the welfare and the behaviour. And it's a big problem, and it's getting worse.
Yeah, I know a lot of them are very defensive about line breeding, inbreeding, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, they've got this kind of notion in their head that the sort of genetic purity of their breed is the most important thing. But, so many of these breeds are bred from a very small founding population of dogs, very tiny. A dozen or a few dozen dogs represent the whole founding population. And then they practice things like breeding from champion sires, but very small numbers of champion sires. So again, that tends to concentrate the gene pool. And when you do that kind of thing for a long time, you're going to get problems. It's just inevitable. And that's one type of problem, it's the genetic problems. And the other type of problem is breeding for a more and more exaggerated conformation, the look of the animal. So the classic one is the pug's face or the bulldog's face, which has been sort of progressively squashed into its skull. And then people are surprised that these animals can't breathe anymore. And, that's a fairly straightforward problem to deal with. They have to change the breed standard, and they have to breed the dog back to something more realistic in terms of its health. It doesn't mean, the bulldog has to have a pointed nose. It just means the bulldog's face doesn't have to be completely compressed into its head, which is what they've done, in effect. And if you read the bulldog standard, it says, the distance between the tip of the nose and the stop, which is this bit between the eyes, should be as small as possible. That is what the breed standard says. And so what is the breeder to make of that, except that, basically push the dog's nose into its skull. And instead it should say something like, the nose should be, no less than this,
Yeah.
or something. Give the
Functional airways.
Give the nose enough space to actually allow the dog to breathe properly. And I don't think that's asking too much of breeders to move in that direction. I really don't. The genetic problems are more difficult because you can't see genes, but they're not insurmountable. I mean, they shouldn't be breeding, fathers to daughters and mothers to sons and brothers to sisters the way they do, because obviously we know that from human beings. It's not good for you if you do that kind of incestuous breeding all the time.
What about shelter dogs, James? What sort of outcomes do people get? What should they look out for in shelter dogs?
Yeah, I mean, shelter dogs are... I have a shelter dog myself, and he's a great dog, wonderful dog. It is a bit more of a lottery, getting a shelter dog, in terms of behavior at least. I don't know that there's any evidence that shelter dogs are less healthy than other dogs. I've never seen any evidence, put it that way. But they do tend often to have more behavioral issues. And in fact, the behavioral issue may be the reason why they're in the shelter in the first place. Or at least it may be a reason. It may not be the only reason, but it may be a reason. In the sense that if someone has a bad relationship with their dog, or an unsatisfactory relationship with their dog for reasons caused by the animal's behavior, then they may be more inclined when something else happens in their life to give it to a shelter. So, for example, if they have to move into a different accommodation and they're having more trouble finding accommodation where pets are accepted, it's the person who has the animal with a behavioral problem who's going to be more likely to surrender it to a shelter than the person who has a really strong relationship.
Sure.
And so you have to be aware of that with dogs from shelters. But, I think most of the people who get dogs from shelters are aware of that, actually. They tend to be more educated kind of dog owners. They tend to be more experienced. They tend to be more aware that some of these dogs have issues, but they're just prepared to work with that and the dog and kind of help the dog, adjust to its new home and all the rest of it. And we have actually one little optimistic finding we had recently was that we did some studies developing a kind of short version of the C-BARQ for people relinquishing dogs to shelters. So we thought it'd be interesting for shelters to have a quick behavioral profile of the animal. And we then followed some of those relinquished dogs up after they were adopted to see whether they developed the same kinds of problems that the relinquishing owner was reporting. And there were some problems that were quite persistent. For example, territorial barking, territorial aggression. That was very persistent across households. But most other behavior problems were very unpredictable. You couldn't predict. Which to me suggests that often the problem is the result of the relinquishing home being not right for that dog. And if they get into the right home, they can do fine. So I felt kind of optimistic about that.
So the right home, is that more about how educated or committed the owner is to raising the dog properly, or is it more about making sure the dog is best suited to the particular family they're going to?
Well, I think it's probably a combination of both, but we don't have a lot of information about, as it were, the effectiveness of matching the dog to the owner. We don't really know whether how good we are at matching. We do know, or we have some evidence that the personality of the owner can be an issue. So owners of particular personality types seem to be more likely to have dogs that develop certain types of behavior problem. But it's unclear what it is about those owners. Is it some direct effect that the dog is responding to, or is it something to do with how the owner interacts with the dog or corrects its behavior, or we just don't know how the owner is producing these effects, but we know that the effects are there. So it may be, You get the dog out of that household with that particular personality type of owner and put it with a different personality type of owner, and a lot of the problems just go away. They don't materialize again. So that.
What about the personality of the dog? Do you think that has anything to play in it?
I do, yes. I think almost certainly dogs of certain personality types are better equipped to deal with those kinds of transitions between households. I think probably dogs of certain personality types, may not do well in a kind of busy household where there's lots of changes to routine, for example. A more chaotic sort of household may be very difficult for some dogs to deal with, and they would be better off in a household where everything's very routine and not much changes. But again, we don't know much about this. There's hardly any research or studies. It's just some interesting correlations.
Yeah, and then you've got the complicating factor of how they're reared from that age of 7 or 8 weeks on to, say, 12 to 16 weeks, which is another factor, which makes a huge difference. So it can actually change what result you get when they're just a little tot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I read somewhere that some of the shelter dogs, a lot of them, an appalling, disturbing percentage of them actually showed themselves up as passing some of the good canine citizen tests. Later on, found to be quite aggressive dogs, and that wasn't actually picked up in the tests they did on them in the shelters. And I wonder, whether that's a bit of a risk that people might be taking when they get dogs that seem to be docile and non-aggressive.
I think this was true with things like territorial aggression. The thing is, when a dog's in a shelter, it doesn't regard the shelter as its home. So it's not defensive in that environment. Because it's in a strange environment, it doesn't show this kind of territorial behavior. But it may have shown it in the relinquishing home. May then show it again in the adopting home when it settles down and starts to view the new home as its domain, as its territory. And it's very difficult to spot those dogs in the shelter environment because they don't perceive the shelter as home. It's just a place where they are, a scary place where they are. And so it's really hard to imagine what test you could devise that would actually measure that in a shelter situation. So in that sense, we're all flying blind. We have no real measure that we can use to establish whether or not a dog is highly territorial, and that could be a problem.
So perhaps someone who was getting a dog from a shelter might be wise to take it on a trial basis first, perhaps, or have it from a fostering situation where it's been assessed first.
Yeah, I mean that's a possibility, or. I think in a sense, every dog you get from a shelter, you should take on a trial basis. Most shelters will take a dog back if it becomes a huge problem. And I think when you adopt a dog from a shelter, you should be aware and open to the possibility that this won't work out. It might not work out. That this dog may suddenly reveal aspects to its character or its personality that you had no way of learning about in the shelter environment. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to develop this C-BARQ tool for people relinquishing dogs, because that might give you information about stuff that was going on in the previous household with this dog, which just doesn't show up in the shelter situation.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I think anyone getting a dog from a shelter needs to be realistic and needs to be open to the possibility that it's not going to work out. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't sort of approach the relationship in a sort of positive way, but just got to be careful because sometimes it won't work out. Usually it will, but sometimes it won't.
Have you got any views on the debate between dog trainers about passive versus active dog training?
Well, I think, there's been this kind of pendulum swings in the dog training world, rather like in the child rearing world, where the pendulum swings back and forth between, never discipline your child, or always discipline your child. The same things happen with dog training. I think, the sort of authoritarian approach to dog training was fashionable for a while, and then people took it too far, and they applied it across the board to all the different types of breeds, which was very inappropriate, because I think different breeds need different approaches very often.
Really?
Yeah. And as well as different individual dogs need different approaches. And then the pendulum has now swung totally the other way to reward-only training, never use correction or punishment. And I think probably the truth lies somewhere in between, as it usually does. Whenever you swing out to the extremes, you're probably wrong, in my view. And that you need to be very, again, very sensitive to the individual characteristics of the dog. A dog that is easily frightened should never be punished. Never. It just doesn't make sense. You're just going to exaggerate things, exacerbate things. And you should be able to achieve everything you want to achieve just through rewards. Some dogs may require correction, and I don't think correction is necessarily a bad thing in that context. We all, it's part of learning to live in the world. All of us have unpleasant experiences from which we learn. The experience doesn't have to be horrible for us to learn that it was not a good thing to have done. And this is very cute. She's looking at me now. Hello. A little sort of beady eyes.
Did you hear what he said about you?
I just think people have to be very careful about and know their dog and know the limits. People get so messed up with this training business, I think. It shouldn't be that complicated.
No.
But we need to get rid of ideas about pack leaders and dominance and stuff like that. I mean, it's not a useful thing to be thinking about. People confuse dominance, which is about relationships, with being dominant, which is not. People should not be dominant with their dogs. They're likely to get bitten 9 times out of 10 anyway. But they should also be aware that some dogs are quite hierarchical in their thinking, and they like social structure, they like social hierarchy, and they want to know where they stand in that social hierarchy. And in that context, you don't need to use violence or punishment. You just need to establish the rules, for how to live in that household. And once
nothing in life is free.
Yeah, and once the dog knows the rules, they're fine. They don't. Very few dogs want to buck the trend the whole time. I don't believe all that stuff about sort of alpha animals, that somehow there's a dog is born to want to dominate everybody. I just don't believe it. It's not. I've never met a dog like that.
Yeah, but packs do have leaders, and they want to know you as a leader. Some dogs, it's important.
They just want to know what the social structure is, what the hierarchy is, who's up there, who's down there, and they want to know where they are in relation to everybody else. And once they know that, they should be fine.
Cool. So, have you got anything you want to say about the value of owning a dog? What the potential value is to a family?
Well, I mean, for me, I think they're the kind of ultimate social support providers. They are. They mean different things to different people. That's clearly the case. For some people, they're like children. They fulfill the same role as children. For some people, they're much more like a playmate or a partner, somebody you spend time with and enjoy recreational activities together. Some people do all of those. Some people perceive the dog very much as a source of protection. So that, dogs are multi-purpose animals. and they serve different functions for different people. But by and large, the greatest benefit, I think, to be derived from them is this, what I would call social support function. We know that humans need social support. We know that people who lack social support are more vulnerable to becoming ill, for example, or developing heart disease, all these kinds of problems. And so it's very important for us to feel like we have that social support. And I think dogs are very good at providing that, really excellent.
Yeah. And what about dogs and children? What value do they have, if any?
Well, there's some research that suggests that they're more important for kids who don't have younger siblings.
Oh, really?
So only children and youngest children in families. Often studies have shown that these kinds of kids have more intense relationship with their pets, are more involved with their pets, dogs included. And so it may be that for children, the dog is serving serves the same role as a kind of younger sibling. It's someone you develop responsibility for. It's somebody you help with the care of. It's somebody who you play with. It's somebody who you nurture and look after. So it's, and in addition, it's of course, it's a companion. You know, many kids these days, we live in tend to live in small nuclear families. Kids are at home alone a lot. Very important to have somebody else there, and I think a dog's a very valuable partner in that context, bearing in mind that we should never leave a dog alone with a very young child. That's asking for trouble. Never.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, well, have you got anything else you'd like to say about it?
I don't.
Any other advice you could give people about, getting a dog?
No, but, it's like buying a car. Don't do it on a spur of a moment. Give it some thought. Next time you feel like, next time you see that cute puppy and you think, oh, I'd love to take it home, hesitate. Think again. Just think about it. Don't just get it because it was cute.
They're all cute, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. This one's especially cute.
Yeah, she's gorgeous. Oh, thanks, James. I really enjoyed talking with you.
All right. Well, great talking to you too. All right.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.